here we are. Greetings, friends. I'd like to all welcome you here today. We've had an extraordinary series of interviews with warriors and sages. And today we have another warrior and sage combined in one. This is my friend Ryan Michler. Welcome, Ryan.
Sachin, good to see you.
And we met a few years back through this means of internet online with Facebook. Been
Yeah,
following you through the years, and I've been very much appreciating the work that you do with men. You're a men's movement leader. You're a family man. What I see from your expression and shares that family is very valuable and important to you, and you have a wonderful, lovely wife and family.
thank you.
Values and virtues are very important to me as well as a family man. And I thought today we'd just dive into, we're in uncertain times for some of us. Some of us are making certainty out of this. But before we dive into all of that, would you be kind enough to share with my friends here a little bit about who you are, your background, and how you became involved in the men's work movement?
Yeah. Well, like you said, anytime somebody asks me to introduce myself, it's always family man first, husband, father, and then I get into the business and everything else that we've got going on. Because I've created, fortunately, had the opportunity to create a lifestyle that supports what I want to do with regards to my family. So the business supports that, not necessarily the other way around. So we've been fortunate that way. Yeah, I started Order of Man is the name of our organization, our movement. I started 5 years ago, a little over 5 years ago now. Really, just with the goal of tapping into the minds of some of the most inspirational, successful men that I personally know, because I was on my own path of trying to improve as a husband, a father, a business owner, a leader in my community, and I figured if I could tap into the minds of these gentlemen, then I would be able to gain knowledge and perspective and insight from them and be able to apply that in my life. So it was selfishly driven. We just expanded and opened it up to everybody so they could listen into the same conversations that I was having. And from the minute that we started, it just really took off, which is a testament to the fact that men want this information. They want to make themselves more capable, and that's the charge we've been leading over the past 5 years. So that's where we are.
What is the size of the group of men that you serve and are involved in Order of Men?
I mean, if you're taking one metric like the Facebook group, for example, I think we've got 61 or 62,000 guys over there. I think on various social media platforms, we're probably 500,000 people. The podcast has been downloaded over 20 million times now. It's just it continues to grow exponentially. We've got a digital brotherhood that we run that's about 550 members. So it's pretty powerful. There's a lot of men involved in what we're doing, and it's good to be a part of for sure.
That's fantastic, right? So, I'd love to hear your sense of now you've been serving and working and sharing with all types of men from all walks of life, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Where have we in society? I'd love your take on where have we been in society as men, what you see that we're at now, and where we're moving into, or where we should be or could be moving into.
Yeah, I mean one of the taglines, we have a few, but one of them is to reclaim and restore masculinity. And so every once in a while, somebody will ask me, "Well, reclaim and restore it to what?" Right? Which is what you're asking. Like, what
Yes,
was it? What is
exactly.
it now? If you think about your grandfather, this was probably a man. Generally speaking, men were strong. They were bold. They were assertive. They were courageous. They had principles and morals and stood by their convictions. They put their ideas and their theories and their principles to test. Right? They actually took action and applied those things and made sacrifices for what they wanted, and they had things they believed in. And I think anymore, the whole concept of masculinity, if it isn't being attacked, which I'm careful to use that phrase, it's certainly being undermined and dismissed and mocked and ridiculed. And what a shame, because we face times like these, whether it's coronavirus fallout or potential threats, isolated threats. Maybe it's a violent encounter or a natural disaster. And the individuals who are complaining about toxic masculinity and trying to at every turn undermine what it means to be a man and dismissing this whole notion of masculinity as some sort of social construct are the very people that are the recipients and the beneficiaries of what masculinity is all about. And it's times like these where it's difficult and it's uncertain and it's scary and there's variables and there's potential risk and damage, conflict to other individuals that men really step up and society begins to see the worth of strong, bold, capable, honorable men. So my call is to give men the tools and the conversations, the resources, the guidance, the direction, everything they may need to step up and be more capable for themselves, for their families, for their communities, for complete strangers, people who are incapable of providing or taking care of themselves, and really stepping up the way that generally our grandfathers did.
Absolutely. I'm so aligned with you. You know, in this day and age, there's a lot of talk of, as you share, toxic masculinity. And I can see the viewpoint of that. I can see that there's been men in history who take advantage of other people, harm other people, are there for greed, there for lower motives, not just for the motives of their family or to serve society or to strengthen society. But that's not masculinity. That to me is men who are out or women who are out in some way.
Right.
Those values or lesser values, or if you will, values of greed or desires or control, any of those things can be in men or women. They're not masculine or feminine
Yeah.
traits the way I look at it. And for me, masculinity is, as you shared, it's a way of recognizing that there's an inherent power in myself as a man, and I can use that power for the greater good. I can use it for myself. I can use it for sharing. I can use it for selfishness. The way I wield my power is what is the power of my masculinity. And if I have examples, demonstrations, I have great beings who are demonstrating and living examples like you are, like what you're aspiring to share with the men in your group, that I'm aiming to aspire the men in my circles. When we raise the bar, then we reclaim masculinity from its negative impressions, which a lot of people have nowadays. Some of it warranted, a lot of it isn't. So, what is the distinction between strong, bold, dominant, conscious man versus strong, bold, unconscious, controlling man? So, how do we segregate? How do we discern rather than lump it all together as masculinity sucks?
Yeah, I think it's a level of maturity. I really do. You know, every once in a while, I'll get I'll get a comment from somebody. In fact, I just got one yesterday. Somebody said, a real man doesn't need another man to teach him how to be a man." What a what a ridiculous thought. Like, that's the exact opposite of the reality. Like, the reality is that the men, the boys who we have a responsibility for, have to be taught. There's a proverb. I believe it's a Chinese proverb or an African proverb that says, "The boys must be initiated, or they'll burn the village down." And that is the distinction. It's maturity. You know, there's a lot of adult males who are acting more like boys because of their immaturity than responsible, capable men. I mean, to be a male is about biology, but to be a man is about the calling of stepping in and using that biology to help, to serve, to all the things that you had just barely talked about.
And
So
to protect.
protect, right?
And to protect ourselves, protect our families, protect our nobility, protect our integrity.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we talk about the core tenets of masculinity as being protect, provide, and preside, which is synonymous with
Ooh.
leadership.
Say those again.
Protect, provide, and preside, which is, again, synonymous with leadership.
I love that. Please share more about that, my friend.
Well, like you said, protect. I think generally most people would agree with that and believe that. There's a great book called Manhood in the Making by David Gilmour. And in that book, he actually goes through and he studies different cultures throughout time and history and finds striking similarities between cultures and their viewpoints of masculinity that have not even been introduced to each other, which undermines the argument that masculinity is a social construct. Right? Because if it was a social construct, we wouldn't find these striking similarities between most of cultures throughout all of time and history. We'd find varying degrees of masculinity, but it hasn't been that way. Generally, men are looked at, again, as the protector, the provider, presider through all of these cultures and throughout all of history, which means that it's a biological construct and it's supported societally. It's supported societally because it works. Now we live in the luxury of modern times where we have the luxury, the benefit of calling into question the usefulness of masculinity, because your odds of having to deal with a violent encounter, or a life and death situation, or trying to survive because of some sort of natural disaster or climate condition that you're dealing with, are significantly lower than they ever were, which brings into question the usefulness of having a man around. I've got a friend, his name is Jack Donovan. He wrote a book called The Way of Men, and others, but that's one of the books that he wrote that I really like. And he says, anymore, you have to choose to be a man. You have to choose to be a man. It
Yes,
didn't used to be that way. Like, you had to be a man. You think about a dad going to war,
exactly.
and then a young boy who's 10, 11, 12 years old now having to step into that role and provide and protect. And now you're the man of the house. Quite literally, he became the man of the house out of necessity. Well, that necessity isn't there anymore. You think about our kids, and you think about us generally. There's no consequence for our poor behavior or our negative choices. You know, if you get into trouble, you get your hand slapped or you get rescued. If you lose your job, you collect unemployment benefits. There is no consequence for the actions and the decisions that we take and that we make. And how unfortunate is that? Because when we really are in a demanding and difficult situation, we're going to tuck tail and run because we think somebody else is going to come in and rescue us. And we've been conditioned through modern times to believe that that's the case. But anytime you rely upon somebody else to rescue you, to save you, to serve you, to do what you should be doing for yourself, you place yourself in an inferior position and at the mercy of that person, that group of people, or that external circumstance. So I talk a lot about it in the context of masculinity as reclaiming your sovereignty,
Yes.
your responsibility for yourself, not putting it on your wife, not putting it on your kids, not putting it on the government, not putting it on the economic situation or even the health disaster we're dealing with right now, but taking all of the burden of the responsibility. And sometimes that's heavy and it's hard to bear and it's painful, but it's a superior position to hoping and praying that somebody else or some group of people will do it for you. And even when you collect a handout, there's no free ride. That handout, whether you recognize it or acknowledge it or not, comes with strings attached. And you better be
All
certain you know what those strings are. Otherwise, you're teeing yourself and the people you have an obligation for up for failure. It is not a great way to operate your life.
absolutely. The handout mentality, the let me seek and get something from somewhere, let me fill in this void, always has a backfiring effect.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the main principles in warriorship and the traditions I've been involved with is self resourcefulness, just as you said. You know, Mahatma Gandhi, he seemed like a very thin, small, he didn't seem like a brave man on the outside, but he held such profound bravery within himself, even being very slight in his demeanor. He was able to say, hey, listen, we need to first and foremost focus on self resourcefulness, to come back into our own inner integrity, to make it so that we are not reliant on anyone or anyone else, but we're interdependent, not
Mm.
codependent, not at the
Good
behest of
distinction.
others. Absolutely. So we don't need to have a look of bravado on the outside to be a strong man, an aligned man, a good conscious man. But we definitely need to cultivate, I believe, the strength of a lion within ourselves in the face of evil, in the face of illusion, in the face of a society that continuously deluges us with the delusion of, you know, carrot sticks and superficial wealth and superficial tits and ass and all this stuff that comes our way, thinking, so no wonder maleness has gotten a bad rap, because there's part of our consciousness as men that can be hooked by these superficial desires. Can you speak about how we can work with that as men, these things that are aiming to, if you will, keep us adolescent in consciousness?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that those desires and those natural tendencies are there. We fall into the path of least resistance. But I also believe, and then I'll come back to the question that you asked, that those who believe that masculinity is bad or somehow inherently destructive or toxic are usually those individuals who have been hurt in the past.
Yes.
And I certainly feel for those people. You know, There are victims. There are true victims who have been at the mercy of men and some of these situations. But what they've done, instead of dealing with it in a healthy manner, they have lumped a isolated incident into a broad category that, oh, my husband hurt me, therefore men are bad.
Yes.
Right? My father was abusive or an alcoholic, and therefore all fathers and all husbands and all men are that way. There is some level of responsibility for individuals to deal with their baggage and their emotions and their trauma in a healthy way, ourselves included. It's not healthy to blame everybody because you happen to experience an isolated incident, regardless of how tragic that incident may have been. And I'm not discounting any of that. I'm
Yes.
just saying that there's a healthy, more mature way to deal with it. That being said, we have an obligation to learn, us as men, what it actually means to be a man. And
Yes.
I can't tell you how many times I talk with individuals who will send me a message and tell me, hey, my dad was never around. I didn't have guys growing up. I didn't participate in sports. I was raised by my mom. You get into the school system and it's predominantly female teachers. Nothing necessarily wrong with that, but if it isn't helped through having male associates and mentors and coaches, then you're not going to get that masculine perspective either. So as an adult male, we'll use that term, as an adult male, you have a responsibility to learn what it means to be a man. And if you feel like, hey, I'm how do I become a man? How do I become more masculine? The answer is always you spend more time around masculine men, guys like yourself, guys like me, people in your circle, coaches, bosses, friends, employees, because they're going to show you, to go back to what I was talking about with Jack Donovan, the way of men. And Jack Donovan talks about it in the context of the way of men is the way of the gang. Now we think of gang as a has a negative connotation,
Yes.
but you could substitute that word with tribe. That has a more positive connotation. It's the way of the tribe. Men have always, up until relatively recently, operated in tribes,
Yes.
packs, groups, because we're stronger when we're collective. Only recently have we bought into this idea of the lone wolf, that it's James Bond, it's Jason Bourne, it's John Wayne, right? These guys are all like represent what we believe is the epitome of masculinity. And if you look, the one thing they all have in common is they work alone. And so we think, oh, well, yeah, James Bond, he gets the ladies, he gets the cars, he's got the wealth, he has the adventure, he has everything that a man could want. So it must mean that I need to be the guy that operates and works alone. But in real life, not the silver screen, in real life, it's inferior to be on your own as opposed to being with a group of men, a band of brothers who have your back, who will teach you and guide you, who will hold you accountable and hold your feet to the fire when you're screwing up and mess up. I have guys that do that for me. It's not comfortable, but I'm better because of it. So I think we in order to develop and foster our masculinity within ourselves, need to understand that we cannot do it alone. It's not possible to do it alone. It may be tempting. It may be easier at times because we don't have to exert ourselves or expose ourselves to some potential threat, even if that's a threat just to our ego. But it's
Exactly.
always going to serve you better to find men to spend time with, to band with, to hold accountable and be held accountable to.
One of my mentors always used to say, he said, Satyan, it's better to, it's one of my martial art teachers. He said, well, it's better to be humble all the time than to be humiliated all at once.
Mm, I like that.
And, and the way we cultivated that was we would get together with our other brothers in our martial arts circle, and we would give each other, he taught us that the feminine within us, within women, within us all, it grows through loving praise, acknowledgement, sharing, edification, and this raises that part. And to grow the masculine energy, we need loving challenge, not just ribbing, not knocking each other down, but loving challenge. Brother, I know you're capable of even more. Let's see if you can kick even harder. Let's see if you can get 10 more punches in. Let's see if you can wake up a little earlier. Let's see if you can reduce the sugar just 10% more this week and 10% more the next week. And so one of the things I've recognized without a doubt, and I have a very powerful brotherhood in my Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and I know that's something that we both share as a joy.
Yeah.
But in my brotherhood with my Brazilian jiu-jitsu brothers, We hold each other accountable without even saying it.
Mm-hmm.
Just by the fact that we're putting our bodies, our minds, our hearts, our blood, sweat, and tears, and that we're going each other, we're challenging each other at the fullest. And at the end, we knock each other in the hand, we bow to each other, we give each other a hug, and we shoot the shit about life. We talk about, hey, our children, we talk about our partners, our wives, our families, because we've exerted and we've pushed each other, we've challenged each other to be the best. Because, like you, I don't think, it's like a pencil. You can't sharpen a pencil, it's going to get dull if you keep using it. You need to sharpen it. And how do you sharpen it? You need to have a really good sharpener. And I believe that being around other good men is the ultimate sharpener for our own integrity, our own stance, our own power. We can get power from other women. We can get insight. We can get intuition. We get all the beauty that the feminine and women offer. But there's something radically powerful, radically simple that goes beyond words that men give each other for each other, that raise each other to help each other arise together. And I believe this is the time where we can't neutralize or should move away from being a neutral entity and actually claim our full masculinity and recognize it's a force of good. That saying no and yes from our masculinity is an ultimate power that we can wield, especially in these days and times where we have to direct our lives, our families, and the greater good from a place of nobility, from a place of reestablishing or upleveling the overall integrity in how society runs.
Yeah, I agree. I think any man who's experiencing some sort of lack of results or even fulfillment and has an emptiness in his life or depression or potentially even suicidal thoughts comes from a place of subduing who he is. Right? Maybe he has these thoughts about how he's supposed to show up and how he's supposed to act and how he's supposed to behave and how he wants to be seen and viewed and act as a man, and yet he might subconsciously or even consciously, deliberately and intentionally, not step into that for fear of ridicule or being mocked or some sort of scrutiny that he might place himself under. But yeah, you're right. I think when it comes to masculinity, we thrive best under confrontation. I take that example of jujitsu that you used. Like, you are quite literally exposing your vulnerabilities to another man who again, quite literally could take advantage of those vulnerabilities and kill you. Right? And so when you think about banding together with men like that there's a huge element of trust there. Quite literally, I've exposed my neck and you've got your arms wrapped around my neck and you voluntarily stop when I say that's enough, I've had enough, and then you go back and you do it again. This is how men operate best. So if you look at the distinctions between females and males, men and women work best when they're facing each other. Right? They're communal, they're facing each other, they're talking about their issues, they're discussing. There's no confrontation. They're nesting a little bit in a way, if you will, right? They're working together. Men don't work like that. Okay? We work like this, directional. So we don't work face to face, we work shoulder to shoulder, facing outwards towards a common objective and or against a common enemy. And if you can find that in your band of brothers, whether that's a pickup game of basketball or jujitsu or fighting for a cause that you believe or playing some other sport, you'll see. I mean, even look in football, for example. Look at the offensive line. Shoulder to shoulder, facing the enemy, protecting his resources, the football, and his teammates in order to score, to advance. This is a perfect analogy of how men operate best. Shoulder to shoulder, facing outwards towards the enemy, and doing what needs to be done to protect the resources. I think, Satya, and I may have... Oh, there you go.
There we
Yep.
go. Beautiful. That hits her right on the nail. Right on the nail. You know, one of the ways that I look at masculinity in a very simple way, and this goes to the first stage in a simple model of 3 stages. The first stage meaning the old school males, some old school males, and the ones that perhaps have gotten the reputation of being more on the toxic side, which I don't actually use that term. I use the term first stage, which means much more spine, bravado, willpower, ferocity, control mechanisms, all great, all needed when it's in the right time, right place. So strong spine, perhaps an older generation, but less heart connected, as an example. For me, the second stage, man, is someone who's moved from the first stage. Perhaps he's seen his father or previous generations being that stalwart, being that perhaps less emotional, more of that solid spine, less heart connected. He might go and say on some subconscious level or just from his experience, I don't want to be that. I need to open my heart. He goes involved in personal growth, human potential, softening, gets in touch with his emotions. You name it, however. But what happens is a swing starts to happen where it goes from strong spine now to open heart. The second stage, man, he's opened his heart, but he's lost his spine. He lost his vigor, his protective capacity, his capacity to, as you said, bond with other men, to move forward in a straight line, a line in power. So, first stage man, lots of spine, less heart. Second stage man, perhaps lots of heart, but less spine. And I believe this is the perfect time right now where us men can cultivate strong spines of purpose, intention, nobility, honor, integrity, be kick ass when we need to, and at the same time, be open in our heart, be loving, be inclusive, be non judgmental when we need to, be directly strong when we need to, and say no. For me, the power of being able to know what you stand for and what you don't stand for, what you will accept and what you will no longer accept, for me is one of the ultimate inner tools to continue to cultivate in this time.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's two things to follow that up with is you have to have a willingness to stand for those things and not stand for others. So there has to be desire, right? That now we start thinking about goals, ambitions, some desire to be that type of man. But that alone is not enough. Because then you could just fall into the nice guy syndrome. Like, oh, he wants the thing. He wants to be a good man. And this guy doesn't get ahead. So he has the desire, but he's lacking the capability.
Yes.
And you have to have both. Look, if you have all the capability, but not the desire to be a moral man, that's where you start getting into trouble, right? That's where these guys get into trouble. They have the capability, but they don't know how to use it in a way that serves them and other people best. If you have a gentleman who is a nice, kind, moral individual, but can't back that up with any action, I would actually argue he's probably not moral at all. Right? Because you can't be moral if you don't have the ability to back up what you say and to live by your word and your honor code. It's just words. It's meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. So you have to have both a desire to be a moral man, and we can talk about that if we want, or guys
Yes.
can
Yeah.
interpret that.
Yeah.
And you have to be capable of honoring your moral code. You cannot have one without the other. You're less capable. You're frankly, you're not as manly as an individual, a male, who has the morality and the capability. So guys will say, well, who are you to determine what it means to be a man? Nobody. I'm just pointing it out. So yeah, if you're not doing what men do, then yes, you are less manly. Like, there's no other way to sugarcoat that or to make you feel better about that. If you're offended about that, then maybe you fall into that camp. And you ought to shore up one of those areas: morality, capability. It's an important equation to manliness and masculinity.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you, brother. Share more about what it means to be, please, a moral man.
Well, it's interesting because morality, I've thought about this and pondered a lot on where does morality come from? Does it come from God? Is it subjective? Like, where does it come from? I believe it comes from a higher source, and I believe it is objective. I think everybody knows what morality means. We all want to be good people. We have that conscience. I choose to look at it as the Holy Ghost. You may choose to look at it as something different. That's fine. Still objective, still there. So I think it is an objective standard. Now, there's things about morality that are subjective. Like, we know that you probably wouldn't want to just go around killing people. I think most people that are mentally sane would agree with that, right? But then there's other things that might be subject to interpretation or some subjectiveness in defining what morality is. But ultimately, your morality is doing the right thing. It's doing the right thing. It's living in integrity with your word. It's honoring your commitments. It's serving other people. It's being the protector, the provider, the presider. It's a willingness to define what it is you stand for and what you won't stand for, like you talked about earlier. And then it moves into that second component, which is bridging the gap between what you know you should be doing and what you're actually doing. I call it the integrity gap. And the
Mm,
larger that integrity gap is,
yes.
the more dissatisfied you're going to be with who you are. So there's millions and millions of men dealing with anxiety and depression and potentially even suicidal thoughts. And it's my belief, outside of some sort of mental illness or chemical imbalance in their brain, in their bodies, that that stems from a large gap of integrity. And
Yes.
I'm not talking about just doing the right things, although that is what integrity means. I'm saying doing what you know you should be doing,
Yes.
right? If you're out of integrity, so look, there was a time in my life, not even all that long ago, 5, 6 years ago, where I was very down on myself. I wasn't happy with who I was. And here's why: I had this version of myself in my mind that I'm strong, that I'm healthy, that I'm capable, that I'm proficient in leading my family, that I'm running a business, that I'm financially wealthy so I can create opportunities for myself and my family and other people. And none of my actions aligned with that,
Yes.
right? So I had this version of myself and the idea of what I wanted to be, and I wasn't doing anything about it. And that disparity is what created a lot of depression and anxiousness and anxiety in my heart. When a man gets himself on the path, and I'm not saying you need to solve all of the largest world's problems and everything that you've identified as being worthy of your time and attention, but you're moving towards it. What you're doing is you're bridging the gap between what you know about yourself or the vision that you have for yourself and what you're doing about it. It's hard for a man to feel down and depressed and potentially even suicidal when he's actively engaged in work that's meaningful to him, that's driving him towards the version that he's created in his mind about who he has the capability of becoming. This is what it means to be
Yes.
in integrity and to live a moral life, to do what you know you should be doing. It's as simple as that. It's not always easy to implement, but it is a very simple thing.
Not only it's not always easy to implement, but I find it much easier to implement when I'm with other brothers who are aiming to live at that bar of bridging that gap between what they know, who they know they can be and have already inherent within them, and then closing that gap with each other. Brother, you're doing excellent here. Want to acknowledge and honor that. High five, fist bump, whatever it is. Brother, you're a little shady over there, man. Clean that up. I don't
Right.
like that. Personally, I don't like when I'm being told that by my other brother.
Nobody likes that.
No one, but I love it. There's a difference between liking it. I sometimes hate it. But at the end of the day, a few days later, a week later, when I know they're right and I let it in, I soften my ego, allow myself to be upgraded by my brother's good insights. Like we have cars with rear view mirrors and we have mirrors on the side because we cannot see everything. And so
Mm-hmm.
for me, having a strong sense of brotherhood that's integral, that's supportive of each other, and I know this is what you're masterful at and have an incredible organization and body of men doing, which I tell every man should be on, is have it so that you're humble enough to say, look, I'm going to look at the rear view mirror, and that's my brother. He's
Mm.
given me reflections, and I must be willing to see his reflections. And these guys are got my back. And at the same time, I got to have their back. I can't just be a recipient. I got to put myself on the line. I got to be able to take a look at my brothers and also hold them up to their bar, which can also be uncomfortable. Being on the receiving end is one thing, but there's also, I found a lot of men have the shyness. They haven't learned the artistry of how to lovingly challenge and upgrade their other brothers. Can you speak to that part of if you see brothers, if you see family members, if you see men in your life that are open and receptive, how do we bridge the gap if we know there's an area that they could be uplifted? How can we communicate to them?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, you need to ask yourself, are you in the position or authority to do so? Because if you're offering unsolicited feedback, very rarely is that going to be accepted as helpful criticism or constructive criticism and then the lessons that you're teaching applied. It just looks like an attack or an insult. So you have to know your place too, right? Like my place, I'm not responsible, Satyen, for your family.
Oh,
That is not within my authority unless you as the father, the patriarch of your household, give me some of that authority.
yes.
Right? Otherwise, it's not my authority. Right? And so that you have to know your place. Okay, that's important. Second component, you have to come from a good place. Right? Like, I want to help you. I am here to serve you. And as a human being, I fall short all the time of delivering it in the most effective way. But at the core, my motive has to be pure, which is that I want you to thrive and I want you to succeed and I want you to win. So it's very important that if you're listening to the advice of others, that it meets two criteria. And if you're giving advice, it should meet these two criteria as well. Number one, is it true? Is it true? If it's true, good. It needs to be true for you to take it. Number two, is it credible? Meaning, does this person, two things, two criteria for credibility. Does this person know what the hell they're talking about?
Yes.
And do they have the authority to talk with me about it? If when I'm judging criticism, it doesn't meet either of the criteria of is it true and is it credible, then I don't take that criticism to heart. This has actually saved me a lot on social media. Like, this is a great social media tool because
That's a great.
you don't know if it's credible. Like, there's no way for you to prove it's credible unless you know that individual. Like, Satyen, if you saw something on a social media post and you responded back, that's more credible to me because I know you, we have a relationship, I trust you, I like you, I believe in you, you've helped me, than some random stranger that has no relevancy or bearing in my life. So again, the steps are that you have to have the credibility, you have to have the authority, and you have to come from the right place. You have to have the right purpose. And then from there, it's about the individual. Now you're serving. Okay, so here's what a lot of guys will say. And they think they're doing it the right way, but it's very ego driven. What they'll say is it's the 0 F's mentality, right? It's like, this is just the way I am. And if you can't understand it or you don't like it, well then, like, screw you. That's your fault. No, if you're responsible for somebody and you're attempting to articulate a message that will help that individual, yes, they have some responsibility. You're not responsible for their end of it. You're responsible for your end of it, which means that as a human being, we can evolve, we can adapt, we can say things differently. The way I talk with each of my 4 children is different. I talk with my oldest son, who's 13, different than I talk with my 4-year-old son, because I'm a mature human being capable of discernment and adapting my communication style to fit what one of my children may need to hear in a way that they need to hear it. If I just did the 0 F's mentality and I was like, well, like, he's 4, but if he doesn't get it, that's his fault. That sounds stupid. It sounds ridiculous. And yet we do that all the time with other people. We think that if they don't understand that that's their fault. Well, it's actually your fault. If you were trying to deliver and communicate a message and that person doesn't get it, then you need to take responsibility for what you can, which is the way you're communicating that message. And ask yourself, you know what? Am I being too hard? Am I being too soft? Am I using the right vocabulary? Am I using the right language? Am I doing it in a way that they can actually comprehend and then apply this information? But that takes you letting go of your ego and the way you think it should be done, and remember that you are at the service of another individual. When I'm doing a podcast, even this right now, this is not for me. I'm at the service of you. I'm at the service of the people in your audience who are listening. And so I need to attempt to communicate it in a way that's going to serve you and your audience best. You invited me here. I'm at your service.
Oh, thank you, my friend. Very clear, very useful, very exact. And I think what you just shared in terms of discernment can really up level all of us. So thank you for that. I'm going to circle back to being moral. And you talked about the value of having a moral code. Can you share about that? And can you share about what are some of your own moral codes that can inspire us?
Yeah, definitely. You have to have identified a code, or you can look at it another way, a standard operating procedure prior to you getting into a potentially compromising situation. Like I'll give you an example. I have a lot of men occasionally will reach out. This doesn't happen all the time, but it happens more than it should. And guys will step out on their wives, for example, right? They'll cheat with an old fling or an old flame or their secretary, or they'll meet somebody on a trip, and they'll mess up, and they'll say things like, "Oh man, I got caught up in the moment, or I lost myself." No, you didn't even define yourself. You didn't even know who you were. You never articulated who you were, because if you had that standard operating procedure in place, you would have recognized what was happening and you would have been able to nip it before it happened. It's easy to look, I'm not condoning cheating on your spouse or one night stand, any of this. I'm not condoning it. It's easy to get into that position. I could see how any man could get himself into that position. Again, that doesn't mean it makes it right. I'm just saying I can see how that would happen.
Yes.
But in order to avoid things like this and any compromising situations, maybe it's to cheat a client, right? Or make some sort of decision that, isn't really within what you should be doing type of thing. You have to identify what it is before you get caught up in the moment, and your emotions and your hormones and everything else are raging, because that's going to shut off the responsible part of your brain that's logical and rational. So you need to make these types of decisions when you're in that mindset, not emotionally charged. Another example, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, when you're accepting criticism. I had a friend of mine reach out, and he said, "Hey, what you're talking about right now is just an excuse." He was talking about my fitness stuff, because I was talking about my shoulders being injured. He's like, "No, that's just an excuse, and you're using that not to do the work." And my first reaction was like, "Well, screw you. Like, what do you know? You don't know anything," and got defensive, right? That's emotion. I didn't respond that way, which was good, because I noticed myself getting emotional and charged. And so I created space.
Yes.
I created margin. I said, I'm not going to respond at all. I'm not going to respond negatively, positively, nothing. I'm just not going to respond at all. I backed up for an hour, 2 hours tops, came back to it. I was like, oh yeah, he's actually right. That is just an excuse. And then I engaged with him in a meaningful way that served us both, because I had that space and that margin to actually think about it. And he was right, and he's credible. He met the two criteria, and then I was able to engage in a rational discussion. So again, you have to know what your moral code is, what your standard operating procedures are, before you get into the heat of the moment, so that you don't get yourself into those compromising situations.
So you have a default mechanism that you've already pre-chosen of how you're going to operate in life. And so when shit hits the fan, stresses, temptations come in front of us, we're not just defaulting,
right,
falling forward into our desire realms and then saying, oh, there's nothing, that just happened. You have an anchor within yourself that you've chosen, you've galvanized around, and you make that the priority to navigate life from. So,
well, you are, I will say, I will say, and just to make this little point of clarification, you said you're not defaulting. Actually, you are defaulting. You're defaulting to the activity and the action that will serve you best. You're not just taking the path of least resistance. I'll give you an example.
Yes.
Several months ago, I had a gentleman on my podcast by the name of Kyle Carpenter. He is the youngest living Medal of Honor recipient. And when he was I wish I remembered this. Now I feel bad. He was either I think he was in Afghanistan or Iraq, one of the two. Regardless, what he did is he was on a observation post in his base, and an enemy insurgent threw a grenade on top of his observation post. It was him and one other Marine that were manning that observation post, and he jumped on that grenade. Instantaneously, he jumped on it.
Wow.
And saved his fellow Marine and blew himself to shreds. I mean, rib cage just completely shattered, blew off half of his face, blew apart his jaw, lost all of his teeth, lost sight in his eye. I mean, blew him apart. And as we were talking about this, obviously he survived because we're having this discussion. And I said, did you instinctively jump on that grenade? And he said, I don't know, because I don't remember much right before the blast. He doesn't remember much of it. All that he remembers is waking up in a pool of what he thought was warm water. He thought the guys were playing a joke on him by pouring warm water on him, but he quickly realized that it was his own blood that he was laying in. And he says, I don't remember. And I said, well, what do you think? Like, do you think it was instinctive? Do you think that you made a conscious decision? And he says, I think it was instinctive because of the way that he'd been trained. He'd been trained watching other Marines who have done this. He heard stories about that. They drilled these types of activities. So instinctively through his training, he reacted without even thinking in a split second. We do the same thing. All of the stories that we tell ourselves, whether they're constructive or negative stories, all of the stories, and these are scripts, right? And we just play them again and again and again. This goes back to what I said about injured people, verbally, physically, mentally, emotionally, physically, is they've created a script in their mind, right? And so for a woman who has been, let's just say, raped as an example, and she hasn't dealt with this in a healthy way, the script is men are dangerous, men are bad, men are to be avoided, and they will hurt you if you get too close to them. That's her thought process. So she plays this script over and over and over and over again until it is so ingrained into her mind that now that is just truth with a capital T to her.
Yes.
We do the same thing with our moral codes, right? Whether we've consciously, deliberately, and intentionally programmed them, or whether we've just programmed it through a series of events and never really questioned if it was true or not.
Yes.
So you need to rewrite the script in an intentional way. Now, some of what you believe actually might be serving you, because if you're wealthy or you have a great relationship with your children and your wife, that's programming that's serving you well. It's past programming. You may have had a father in your life who was a phenomenal father, a phenomenal husband to your mother. And that's what you saw, and that created that script. And so you're just living out that script, and it's serving you well. But there's a lot of other scripts that all of us, you and me included, believe and fall into that aren't serving us, that are actually hindering us. And we need to question what those are, because the thoughts that we have are the actions that we take and the results that we produce.
Bam. Bam. This is the key. This is the key. The rescripting of our own moral code, which is our operating system in life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, how do we move forward now? We've got a world that's uncertain. We're moving out of this lockdown. Eventually, it'll start loosening up. What's our purpose as men as we move forward?
So here's a mistake I see a lot of guys fall into. And you know it when you're saying, I want to change the world. Because you don't have that authority yet. Right? We go back to what we were talking about earlier. Why don't you focus on changing yourself first? So what we do instead of, and this is what I teach guys to do, instead of focusing on changing the largest unit that we could possibly change, which would potentially be the world, like I want to make a dent in the universe, right? You hear things like this. It's noble. It's ambitious. I can appreciate it. It's just not realistic. Instead of doing that, focus first on the smallest unit of measurement, which is yourself. Focus first on yourself. And this is counter to what so many men believe. We believe generally that we're supposed to serve and we're supposed to sacrifice and we're supposed to toil and we're supposed to serve our families and our wife and our kids and do our job. All of that is true. But if it comes at the expense of you being able to take care of yourself, there's an issue there. When I went through the separation with my wife, which was roughly 11 years or so ago, I thought if she would change, that our marriage would be better. So I was like, so my whole mission at first was to change her. How could I get her to see this? How could I get her to change or be more open or more communicative or more receptive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It wasn't until I stopped doing that and started focusing on the smallest unit of measurement, myself, and started to improve myself, that she started to respond to that. So like I'm just telling you, the guys that say I want to change the world, you haven't earned the right to change the world yet.
Yes.
And if you had, you would have already been changing the world.
Yes.
You have to earn that right first. And you earn it by winning small battles with yourself every single day. As you begin to improve yourself, you gradually and inevitably, naturally, expand your sphere of influence. And that goes to your wife and your kids. And as you start to, and you continue to improve yourself, that sphere of influence grows. This is what's happened with me. Change myself, change the dynamic in relationship with my wife, change the dynamic in relationship with my kids. Now I have even more time and energy and capacity. So I started coaching my kids as sports teams, and I started influencing those young men. And then I started doing Order of Man. And then I influenced 100 people, and then 1,000, and then 10,000, and then 1,000,000. Because I focus always, constantly, I never stop focusing on the smallest unit of measurement, which again is myself. It's my body, it's my mind, it's my soul, it's me. And I am selfish to a degree so that I can get back into serving the people that I love and care about.
Oh, oh, brother, thank you so much. You've been really clear, exact. It's very evident to me that you're living these principles, you're sharing these principles. How can brothers get in touch with Order of Man, get involved in all that you do?
Yeah, the podcast is a great place. So orderofman.com is the website, and then Order of Man is the podcast. And then connect with me on the socials. You can find me here on Facebook because I think it's pulled up on Facebook. We're doing a Facebook Live right now. So you can find me there, connect with me, and yeah, let's stay in touch. Let's help each other out.
I'm really grateful for our time today.
Me
I'm
too.
very inspired by you as well. You know, we have different ages of families and such. And I
Yes.
also am a very strong advocate for men of different ages getting together, youth, children, elders, all different ages, because we can inspire and influence and raise each other up, starting with the initial unit of self. So thank you, brother.
Thank you.
Um, any last things that you wish to share today that's in your heart?
Yeah, I'm just gonna go back to just do what you know you should be doing.
Yeah.
Do what you know you should be doing, and create a process for doing it. Let me leave with something tangible.
Yes.
Every morning, I'd recommend just getting out a piece of paper or a notebook or an app on your computer, a word processing app, and just write out what you want to accomplish that day. Just start with that. I want to accomplish these 5 things, these 10 things, whatever it is. And then, secondary to that, before you're about to shut down shop or close your eyes at night, pull up that list, check off the things that you did, roll the things that you still have not done over to tomorrow, and then do the same thing every single day thereafter. I know that if you're hearing that, you might think, oh, what's that going to do? Or that sounds silly, or why? I promise you that that will help you lead a more intentional, deliberate life, and you will inevitably produce better results because you're doing that.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. To honor you, to honor the sons in our life. My son gave me this as a birthday gift a couple of days ago. It's Rush, one of our mutual, we both love Rush, one of our favorite
Awesome.
bands.
Yeah.
So hats off to you, brother. And hats
Thank
off.
you, Satyan. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks, brother. Much love to the family. Okay.
Thanks. Likewise.
Be well. Thanks, everyone.